Hiya! So today we're going to be talking about why you should be buying vintage.
Woo! We love vintage.
So number one is to be unique. So when you buy vintage, you end up with something that is completely one of a kind and no one else is going to have it. It's not like shopping at Topshop where, you know, everyone's wearing exactly the same thing and you'll walk down the street and you'll pass someone wearing the same top you've got on. But with vintage that doesn't really happen, so it's great for creating your own personal style and having something that's completely unique to yourself and that people will identify with you rather than anyone else in the world.
Yeah. So vintage can be those one-of-a-kind pieces that no one else has, and you know, if you don't want to look like everybody else and you want to have that identity that you can play with fashion and play with style, vintage is such a good way to go.
Yeah. So number two is to be green. So when you're buying vintage, obviously these items are items that have been made like years ago, and so by selling vintage what we are doing is we're recycling. So if you're buying something vintage and you're wearing something vintage, then essentially you are helping to be eco-friendly and save the planet, and you're not contributing to the manufacturing process that is frankly destroying the earth at the minute. So it's really important to make sure that you're buying clothing that is responsible and green. So obviously when you're buying things from Topshop, they are being made in factories in India where they contribute a lot to, you know, dyeing fabrics, and these dyes are actually really harmful, and so, you know, you need to make sure you're not part of that. And also everything's being made in sweatshops. Not everything, I don't want to like generalise the high street, but a lot of it is. And I mean, me and Lucie, neither of us really shop at Primark because of all the bad press they've had about the sweatshops, that, you know, they're not being paid a fair wage, and we think that that's something that is really important, and it's why, you know, our prices might be a bit different, a bit higher than you would expect. And that's purely because, you know, with our handmade stuff, we've made them ourselves, we've put in the time and we've gone out and looked for the fabric, and it's not being made really cheap, it's being made by me and Lucie, and we're paying ourselves a fair wage, and that's the way it should be. People should be, you know, expecting to pay the correct prices for these things rather than, you know, people dying to make you a Primark t-shirt.
So number three is the quality. So vintage items, back, you know, we sell vintage from, you know, anything from the early 20s to the late 90s. And obviously back in the day, people made their clothes with so much care. They made them, you know, carefully, and they handmade a lot of stuff, did a lot of hand stitching, everything like that. So vintage clothing offers a quality that you don't get nowadays on the high street or just from anywhere you buy them that mass produce clothing. So one-of-a-kind clothing has that specialness, you know, it has lining, it has amazing embroidery, it has beautiful embellishment. This kind of vintage that we love has been made with such care, and it just makes buying vintage so much more special when you're buying something that you know has this quality about it, and you know that you're doing something positive for the world when you're buying something that isn't just £5 from Primark.
Yeah, and also, you know, the more care was taken back then because they weren't trying to make things the cheapest possible price that they could. It was all about quality, and that's what you get when you buy a vintage piece.
So number four is history. So with every vintage item there comes a story, and for us that's what's really amazing about shopping vintage, buying vintage and selling vintage, because every vintage piece we see, you know, we go out, we source it and we find it and we choose what we put on our site and we curate how it looks on our site, and every piece has a history and where it came from, where it began, who's worn it before, who's cared for it, who's loved that piece and then thought, okay, I'll give it away because I don't wear it so much, and I'll give it away, and someone else buys that piece and it becomes something that they keep in their wardrobe for ages, and then they hand it down to someone else and they hand it down to someone else, and these quality vintage pieces can just stay in generations for so long, and it's amazing that that's what vintage can do. Whereas if you're buying from the high street, if you're buying throwaway fashion, there's not that sense of magical that comes with fashion that people should have about fashion, because for us that's what it's all about. It's all about creating a style with amazing one-of-a-kind pieces that are quality and have a story behind them and that can lead your story of your life when you wear them, and that's just why it means so much to us.
Yeah, there's something very sentimental about vintage clothing that you just don't get with your Primark and your Topshops. You know, a vintage piece you will hold on to and it's been looked after, and when you buy a vintage piece you want to look after it too. And you know, we love, like, you know, when we go out looking and sourcing, picking up items and saying, you know, oh, I wonder who was wearing this. And you know, it's great just to think about all the things that, like, the life that this piece of clothing had, which sounds ridiculous, but
and
you
the
know,
life
it's
it
lovely.
can go on to be as well. It's not
amazing.
just destined for the garbage bin when
Or
it's
the charity shop.
yeah, when it's, you know, run out of its goodness because you're off to Primark going for the next haul. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So vintage is just something special that needs to be respected and needs to be thought of as not just someone's second-hand garments. There's so much more to vintage than that. It's history, it's generations of cultures and subcultures all merging into what we wear every day.
So we really hope that you enjoyed watching this video, and hopefully it's given you a bit more of an insight into vintage clothing and why you should go green. So make sure that you give us a thumbs up and subscribe to see more videos.
Subscribe below. Subscribe below.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.